Hi, I'm Neil, and you probably recognize me at this point. This is LeBron. You probably recognize him. Um, I'm sorry to tell you that it's just me this evening. LeBron will not be here. I'm pretty sure that it would be much more exciting if he were here, and probably much more exciting if he were here and I wasn't here. But unfortunately, that's not the way it works. We're going to talk about the apology tonight. I have assigned it, obviously, and this is the Apology by Plato from the collection of works, small collection of works called Five Dialogues. Um, I would like you to have the book with you. I'm gonna read from it, and I would like you to follow along. Obviously, I can't force you to follow along. I'm not there, and it's pretty much your free choice. I I am of the belief that if you follow along as we go through it, you'll find this a lot more interesting. And I'm pretty sure that LeBron would agree with me. So both of us think that you should have the book in front of you and read along. Um, I want to talk tonight. I want to talk now about really who Socrates is essentially, and this is really key to understanding Socrates. If you get what we're going to talk about now, you'll understand Socrates. You'll understand why he does and says the things that he does and says. If you don't get it, you will probably not be liking this very much, and there's not much I can do about that. But this is pretty much the essence of I think the essence of Socrates. And the essence of Socrates is one of the essences, and you've seen this, I mean, in a general way, are the questions that Socrates asks. And, and there is one question that is really essential to Socrates, that drives Socrates' entire life. I could say that this is Socrates, the main question that he asks, but I really can say that it's the only question that he's interested in. Everything else is way secondary and third and fourth place. This is the question that drives Socrates' life, and so I want to talk about that question. The question that drives Socrates is, what shall I, how shall I live my life? And this is the key question in his life, say, as I've said, and he pursues that. And in pursuing that question, he defines for us our Western tradition of thought and really our Western philosophical tradition. How shall I live my life? Um, he does answer the question, and that is also why he's very important. I mean, it's not only the question, it is the answer to it. And the answer that Socrates gives to the question, how shall I live my life, is he says, I should live a good life. And this answer is pretty fundamental also. I should live a good life. It doesn't maybe tell us a lot. Everybody wants to live a good life. It's the question that I posed to you at the very beginning of the term. I asked you to write little pieces on what the good life was to you or is to you, and what the bad life is or was to you, and and that was not accidental to ask that question. I asked that question because it's the driving question in the Western tradition. It is the question that Socrates asks, and in asking and claiming that we should live good lives, he tells us who we are. He gives us really how we think about the world. And unfortunately, if you answer the question, how shall I live my life? We should live a good life. It doesn't tell you a lot, because the next question is, of course, well, what is the good life? That's really the key. And so what what we want to talk about now today is Socrates' answer to the question, what is the good life? He does answer it, and philosophy does try to answer it. And and in fact, that answer is a very specific answer. And we can find that in Plato's work, the Apology, that we're studying right now. And Socrates tells us the answer to the question, what is the good life? Or at least he leads us in the direction of the answer. He tells us on page 41. And I'm going to read this paragraph. It's maybe the key paragraph in the Apology. Certainly for understanding who Socrates is, it's the key paragraph. And it's page 41. It's the second full paragraph. And Socrates says there on page 41, he says, perhaps someone might say, but Socrates, if you leave us, will you not be able to live quietly without talking? I mean, can't you just shut up, Socrates? You talk and you talk and you talk. Just be quiet already. And so Socrates says, if you leave us, this is what the Athenians are saying, if you leave us, will you not be able to live quietly without talking? And he continues and he says, now this is the most difficult point on which to convince some of you. If I say that it is impossible for me to keep quiet, because that means disobeying the God, you will not believe me and will think I am being ironical. On the other hand, if I say that it is the greatest good for a man to discuss virtue every day, and those other things about which you hear me conversing and testing myself and others, for the unexamined life is not worth living for men, you will believe me even less. And that is the key answer to the question, what is the good life for Socrates? The good life, he says, or really he's kind of framing it in the reverse. He's saying the unexamined life is not worth living for men. And so the good life for Socrates is the examined life. And that answer sets us on a path in Western civilization that we still pursue to this day. The unexamined life is not worth living for men. And so he says here, just to hold this up, I'm trying this. I thought this would be more interesting than me doing a PowerPoint presentation, which I think are generally tedious and boring. But here I can fumble around and give you some activity. The unexamined life is not worth living for men. Now, what Socrates means in that, on the other hand, he's not saying that, or at least one interpretation of that is that he's not saying that if you don't examine your life, you should kill yourself or you should be dead. What he's saying is that the unexamined life is not a worthwhile life for human beings. The unexamined life is not a worthwhile life for human beings. That is, that what makes our lives worthwhile is our ability and our capacity and our desire to understand our lives, to examine ourselves, to know who we are. In fact, Socrates is really saying that we should know ourselves, know thyself. This is the principle that we could say that Socrates died for. We talk about people who are principled and who die for their principles, and many times that is vague. What principles? We know for Socrates, it's not a vague principle. We know the principle that he died for. That principle is the examined life, the principle to know thyself. And so Socrates says that what gives our lives, what makes our lives worth living, what makes our lives worthwhile, is our ability and our desire and our activity of examining it. Um, and so the Athenians are saying, I mean, this paragraph is on page 41 is so important, and I'm going to read it again. Socrates is saying, it's on page 41, it's right before the verdict is announced that he's going to be sentenced to death. He's been found guilty, and this is right before he's about to be sentenced to death. And he says, perhaps someone might say, but Socrates, if you leave us, will you not be able to live quietly without talking? If I say that it is impossible for me to keep quiet, because that means disobeying the God, and you will not believe me and will think I am being ironical. On the other hand, if I say that it is the greatest good for a man to discuss virtue every day, and those other things about which you hear me conversing and testing myself and others, for the unexamined life is not worth living for men, you will believe me even less. At some level, so Socrates is saying the examined life is what makes our lives worthwhile. Examining our lives, understanding our lives. At some level, we want to say to Socrates, and this is, I think, what he's saying here, Socrates, um, can't you just leave us alone? Can you not be quiet for a bit? And there's a very important point here for Socrates, and that is that Socrates believes that he can't examine himself by himself. He must examine himself by questioning others. And he means that in a literal way. He believes that he cannot go off and sit in some mountain on some mountaintop and think, who am I? Who am I? That's not the way, Socrates says, that we examine ourselves. In fact, what Socrates is saying, we can only examine ourselves by examining others. We can only question ourselves by questioning others. And what he means by that is that we don't we don't have all of these questions that we can just spit out. I don't know all the questions that are important questions. The way that I know the questions to ask myself are is by getting into conversations with other people, and they pose questions to me, and then I think about them. So it's not like that it's not like I know all my beliefs and all the questions that follow those beliefs, or that gives rise to those beliefs. Socrates, and I agree, and I think most philosophers would agree here. We by ourselves can't anticipate all the questions. The only way we know who we are, and the only way we know what we believe, is by conversing with others. And other people ask us questions, pose questions to us, and then we have to respond to them. You don't know, I mean, I can mention, and you probably can too, we can mention things that we kind of believe, but we don't know the right questions really to pursue them. So sorry about that. I got a little tongue-tied, and I was spiraling downward, and I could see that I was not going to pull myself out of it. So, as I was saying, we know things that we kind of believe, but we don't know the right questions to pursue them. So we have some maybe vague beliefs about climate change. We have some maybe vague beliefs about racism. Maybe we have some beliefs about vegetarianism, which is not hard to have beliefs about. If you've ever seen a video about how they treat chickens, how they raise chickens that eventually end up on our dinner plates. And I'm just using that as an example. I'm not a vegetarian, but I have a hard time thinking about some of those videos. I mean, but how do we know what we believe about vegetarianism or not vegetarianism unless we are presented with other people's experiences and other people's questions. How do we know who's responsible for the general misery in the world? How do we know who's responsible for my misery or your misery? The point is that we can only examine our own beliefs and our own self by being in conversations with other people who pose questions. So when Socrates says on page 41, when he responds to this hypothetical question, why can't he just shut up? Socrates is saying, why doesn't Socrates examine himself by himself? And it's because we don't know what we believe unless we converse with others. How do we know what we believe unless we converse with others? Other people present questions and ideas to us that we then consider, hopefully, and that we think about. And the point is that you cannot, and this is Socrates' point, we cannot examine ourselves by ourselves. It's just impossible. I don't know the questions to ask. And if the right questions are asked and they land on us, we then pursue those questions. And we pursue those questions by reading or thinking or talking with other people or getting information in other ways. So when Socrates responds to the to the hypothetical Athenians, look, Socrates, we'll let you go. We don't really want to sentence you to death, but you need to shut up. You need to just go off by yourself and examine yourself. Socrates' answer to that response to that is, I can't possibly do that because I don't know the questions to ask. So in order to examine himself, Socrates has to examine others. And in examining others, he examines himself. So when Socrates makes his main point that the unexamined life is not a worthwhile life for human beings, what he's saying is the only worthwhile life is the life that is well understood. And in order to understand your life, you must locate yourself. You must place yourself in conversations with others where you and they examine each other. It's the only way it can be done. Now, I think this is a pretty specific question. Answer to what is the good life. The good life is the examined life, and that examination takes place with other people. That's pretty specific, I think. But then we confront the difficulty of what do we mean by examination? How do we examine others? And so Socrates asks or implies, what is examination? How do we examine ourselves and others? And he does not leave that question vague. Go ask questions and, whatever you do, it'll be fine. That's actually not Socrates' opinion. There is a way to examine yourself and a way to examine others. And what he does is to take us on a story of how he came to carry himself in this way. I mean, that is to construct an identity where his main activity was examining himself and others, was asking people questions. And what that is, what we find revealed there, is Socrates' explanation of, how he came to do that. And I call that, this next part, Socrates and the Delphic Oracle. And I am going to stop here and make another video, and we'll resume very quickly. Thank you.